Good morning. Siman Tuf Mem Beis Sif Lamed Aleph. Kosav Harash Rosh Perikol Shah. Hamurai Shoisini Idna Shakuran Al Medi. Shenostim Bo Lechem Koli. Yesh Omrim Shemutter Achar Pesach. The Chometz Aide Teruva Shavel Pesach Mutter Bana. Murais, which is a mixture of fish oil and wine, and apparently they would put in some sort of croutons as well. So some say that it is permissible after Pesach because a chametz that's part of a mixture that you had over Pesach is permissible to derive benefit from it after Pesach. Also, the chametz was singed before Pesach, and therefore it is permissible to derive benefit from it after Pesach. We do not accept this opinion, because that which a mixture would be permissible after Pesach is only when it was not mixed intentionally. But to intentionally mix chametz into some other foods, and to leave it till after Pesach, lo would not be permissible. Nami lo, the fact that you singed the chametz and turned it into croutons doesn't really help. Because Emer lo charcho yafa yafa, because perhaps you didn't really singe it very well. Because when you made it, you weren't thinking about burning it to the extent that you could then keep it over Pesach. Vod v'chule, etc. Morayis to orchel mechal hachi asur, but morayis, where it is normal to eat it with these croutons, it's prohibited. Kolomar de charcho ein mutter el kshein roy klal lachila, because singeing the croutons only helps if you singe them to the point where they're no longer edible. Morayis she'ochlin also in heter bedavar, but morayis where it's made to be eaten, so the fact that they're singed does not create any heter. V'zeo gamdas harambam shechashiv morayis be'isur bal yirah. The Rambam holds that it is an isur from the Torah to have morayis over Pesach machkasa b'sif yudam lashon harash af she'osur lachar Pesach mikol makom einir b'dvarv she'avral of b'bal yirah. But from the Rush, even though he does say you may not eat this after Pesach, but it does not seem that he would be of the opinion that keeping it over Pesach would be a prohibition of Bal Yiro. Biosim lashon hatur shekasav dalmadi asur lo'ochlo achar Pesach ein shem mashvil hedi darak lo'ochlo asur. And the Tur who just says you can't eat it after Pesach, the implication is that only eating it is prohibited after Pesach. Hatema hatur lashon harash mavur degamba na asur. It's a little bit of puzzling why the Torah just says you can't eat it after Pesach when his father, the Rush, indicates that any benefit would be prohibited after Pesach. But the reason is because the Torah is being consistent with something he also wrote, that even to intentionally create a mixture before Pesach, the mixture is mutter after Pesach. Miubachila asur, but it would only be permissible after Pesach to derive benefit from it. It would not be permissible to eat it. Lamed Beis. Dioshu muvushal b'seicha sha'orim, ink which is cooked with barley beer. Mutter lichtov bo b'chol moed Pesach. You can write with it on chol moed Pesach. V'dafka shenasa kodem Pesach. That's only if you made the ink before Pesach. Avalasa sadyo b'Pesach asur, but to make that ink on Pesach would be permissible, would be prohibited. We're not worried that if you're using that ink on Chol HaMoed, you might stick the quill in your mouth. Even though it is not fit for canine consumption, you can't eat it, as we've explained. But the fact is, it's not normal to put the inky side of the quill into your mouth. And if you would, the only time when something which is no longer fit for canine consumption is a problem is if you're intentionally eating it, because then in your mind, as we've discussed before, and by intentionally eating it, you are designated back as food. But ubakan over here, when you're just absent-mindedly chewing on the quill, lo achshave, that's not considered that you are giving it back the status of food. Sif Lamed Gimel. Possession is misbar b'din botzek shebesitke areva. What we discussed last night about the dough that's in the cracks of the trough that you knead in. Zeo ba'areva shirak mashin bolechem. That's really talking about the bowl in which you leave the bread after you've made it. But if it's the actual one in which you're kneading, if you want to use it on Pesach, not only do you have to remove all the chametz in it, but you have to wash it with hot water, and to dig out any of the chametz which is in the wooden cracks. Eno mole, it still won't help Kiev Shula Nakran, because you can't really clean it out very well. Shula Yashar Bakli Kazayas, that there won't remain in total a kazayas of dough in the cracks. Vakli Mitzarfan, and the vessel will combine all of that from a halachic standpoint to be considered to be one whole kazayas. The Kivin Shasuya Lalisha, since the bowl is made for kneading, Kol Masha Bakli Chaticha Achasi, we consider all that is in the bowl to be one piece. Not only can you use that bowl in Pesach, but even owning it would be a prohibition of Bal Yera'ah. You have to give it before Pesach as a gift to a Gentile, or to sell it to him at Achar Pesach until Pesach passes. We'll explain that later on. Or to smear the whole thing with mud. Even though this is a big strictness, you should still do this. This is talking about a big bowl which is made out of planks. And that's why there's a lot of cracks between the planks. But our small bowls, which is made out of one hollowed piece of wood, vein basedek, and there's not cracks between planks. It's certainly possible to wash it properly and poke out all the chametz. You can keep it over Pesach. But you still can't use it on Pesach. The Zeo base shor shebegemara. That's what the Gemara talks about, is a sourdough house, so to speak. You cannot use it. Also, the dough, which is in a bowl that's made out of boards of wood, you can't get rid of all of the chametz. You should give it to a Gentile as a gift. The same thing you should do with any vessels in which you leave flour all year long, if it's made out of a few boards. You can definitely assume that in the cracks there will be flour that became chametzdik. Or if you have, let's say, a vessel in which you keep your bread, and there are cracks, and it is made out of wicker. It's difficult to dig it all out. And if you have a piece of cloth that you would put on top of your flour sack, lo mahani niur, so shaking it out is not good enough. You should wash it in hot water if you would like to utilize it on Pesach. You have to wash it in hot water and use ashes and bang it over shulchan. But your regular tablecloths, it's enough to just wash them. Siman Tov Mem Gimel. Din chametz be'erev Pesach la'achar sheish shas. The halacha of chametz on erev Pesach after 6 hours. Sif Aleph. Kranis bar b'siman Tov lamed Aleph the Rambam ochel chametz be'erev Pesach chatzos over belav. We've explained earlier that according to the Rambam, after midday on erev Pesach, chametz consumption would be a lav. The Rosh and the Tur and the Gaonim agree with the Rambam. Even though the Raavad and other Rishonim do not agree with them, but the halacha is in accordance with the Rambam, and that is in all of Klal Yisrael. This idea that it's a deoraisa, it's a Torah prohibition, has spread. She'achar chatzotz asur chametz b'hana min Torah, that after noon on Erev Pesach, the prohibition of chametz is a Torah prohibition. B'bal yira gamkein, and owning it, you would be transgressing the law of Bal yira. Gamkein b'bal yira gamkein das Rav shein over alayla. Whereas the Raiva would hold that there's no Bal Yira until nighttime. The Rambam over Bal Yira mechatzos. According to the Rambam, the prohibition is from noon. And Rashi in Bava Kama also says the same thing. Base. Since generally during the year everybody uses chametz, men, women, adults, kids, and therefore you're not used to refraining from chametz. So therefore, Chazal wanted to keep us away from doing anything prohibited with chametz on Pesach, and therefore they said at 2 hours before noon we should not be eating chametz. The chilku, and they distinguished bein isur achila le isur hana, between the prohibition of eating and the prohibition of deriving any benefit from chametz. That benefit is prohibited an hour before noon, and eating is prohibited 2 hours beforehand. The time of the milsa mishum de bein shah shishis le bein shah shvius hatas matzoi harbe lefika chasru ba'ana. The reason is between the 6th hour and the 7th hour of the day, it's easy for you to make a mistake. Remember, back in those days, people didn't have clocks. They were just looking at the sun. And that's why in that last hour, when you could be confusing the time, Chazal prohibited even benefit. But making a mistake between the 5th and 7th hour of the day, it's unlikely for a person to make such a mistake. Rak b'yom ha'mu'un, unless it's a cloudy day. Because anybody knows that in the 5th hour of the day the sun is in the east, and the 7th hour of the day the sun is in the west. Therefore, die lesser ba'achila. Therefore, the prohibition in the 5th hour is only an eating one, v'lo b'hana, not a benefit prohibition. And this prohibition, starting earlier, is true even for chametz that belongs to a Gentile, even for chametz that's in a mixture, or even chametz nuksha. Sif Gimel. Therefore, you may not eat chametz from the beginning of the 5th hour. But during the entirety of the 5th hour, mutter bana, you may derive benefit. V'rashoy lemochol ein Yehudi, and you can still sell your chametz to a Gentile. You don't have to worry that maybe someone will mistakenly sell chametz to a Jew in that time. They used to call chametz b'shach chamishes, because there are not Jews out there buying chametz during that 5th hour. V'afilu min chametz sheshem balav olav kimo kutach, even a type of chametz that is associated with its owner, like kutach, which is a mixture of chametz and whey and other stuff, that people will say on it, zeh kutach shaploni, that's so-and-so's kutach. So therefore you might say you can't sell to a guy because mutter gam kem limkor, you're allowed to sell, and we're not worried that someone might suspect that you sold it to the Gentile on Pesach. Das Rashi Rambam, that's Rashi in the Rambam's opinion of Adasa Tosfos, Reish Per Kol Shah Asur Limkor Zel Lamed Yom Kodem Pesach, but the Rambam, the Tosfos holds that for 30 days before Pesach, you may not sell your kutach to a Gentile. Miyushim Posek Lehevi Daitim Klal, but none of the poskim bring down the stricter opinion of Tosfos. Daled. V'yochel b'shah chamishis lahachel achametz l'behem achayev v'of. During the 5th hour, you can feed your chametz to any farm animals, wild animals, or birds. Just make sure that they don't take any of it and hide it. Any leftovers of the animals, get rid of. Even though wild animals have a tendency to hide the chametz, We're not worried about that as long as you're keeping an eye on them. And the farm animals, even though they do not generally hide foods, still you are obligated to keep an eye on it if you're feeding it chametz in the 5th hour. From the beginning of the 6th hour and onward, you may not even derive benefit. The Torah writes that since Chazal forbade you from deriving any benefit in that 6th hour, so if you would give it to a woman for Kedushin in order to facilitate betrothal, it would not be considered to be valid because you gave her something that has no worth. That's only with actual chametz. Chametz nuksha shumidirabanan l'Rashi hine haya kechametz d'oraisler be'atam ki b'tarti d'rabanan shas d'rabanan chametz d'rabanan chashin l'kedushin. And according to Rashi, even chametz nuksha is the kedushin would not be valid, but according to Rabbeinu Tam, since chametz nuksha is chametz rabbinically, and the time is rabbinic time, so therefore we are strict and we're machmir as if the marriage was facilitated. Sifches v'kosav Rabbeinu Arama the b'shnas ha'ibor in a leap year like this year, in which case by the time Erev Pesach comes along, the days are much longer. Shayom aruch elu ha'arba shas lefi inyan hayom. The 4 hours are based on the length of the day, meaning you divide the day up into 12 equal parts, and 4 of those are considered to be 4 hours. And therefore you can eat chametz all the way until a third of the day. Some say you can eat it until 2 clock hours before chatzos, ad kan l'shona. Kolomar, meaning that yesh omrim sovrim, the second opinion holds the ein holchin achar shlish hayom, that the prohibition doesn't start after 1/3 of the day. El shekach gozru, but what Chazal instituted was shel olam shtei shas kodem chatzos hayom, that always 2 hours before chatzos asur lechol chametz, you can't eat chametz. Aval gedolim dachu zeh, but the great rabbis have rejected this opinion. V'chein ikul dina. And that is definitely the primary way to look at it halachically. The chashvin and shlish hayom, that we only pay attention to a third of the day. Some people count a third of the day as the day beginning from dawn until the stars come out. Some count from sunrise to sunset. That is the halacha according to the opinion of the great Achrodim, meaning the Magen Avram and the Shulchan Aruch Harav. Same thing when it comes to Shema and Shemon Esrei. That is the halacha from a practical standpoint. That the length of the hours that we're talking about are flexible based on the length of the day. Meaning that if the length of the day is 15 clock hours, then 1 sha'az manis would be 1 1/4 hours. Sif Vav. Yisrael shoyi biyadochem so she Yisrael acher bipikadon. If one Jewish person is holding on to chametz belonging to another Jewish person that he gave to him to watch, Yakvenu at Shah Chamishis, he should hold on to it on Erev Pesach until the 5th hour. But if the owners don't come by the end of the 5th hour, Im Gerenu, he should sell the chametz Le'enu Yehudi to a Gentile. If it's something that he will not easily be able to find a buyer during the 5th hour, he can sell it earlier. Even if he has to charge less than the normal market price, he should sell it. Even in locain tester lagamri, because if he doesn't sell it, it's going to be worthless and be completely prohibited. Miu. If you know a Gentile you can sell it to now before Pesach, you know we'll sell it back after Pesach, which is what we generally do with our chametz. We'll discuss later on. Michuyev lasos kain, it would be the obligation of the one who's holding on to the chametz for someone else to sell it under those circumstances, v'lo lemachor lechalutin, and not to sell it absolutely. Va'afilu mochor b'mekach hashava, even if you have an opportunity to sell it at its market value, because a person would rather get his own chametz back and not have the cash instead. Have a wonderful day.